Gai gyflwyno i chi y siaradwyr.
So the first speaker tonight
Athro Jane
is
Aron.
Professor Jane Aron.
Mae Jane Aron yn athro
Is
emeritus
she's a Professor Emeritus in the University of South Wales.
Gender and the Writings of Charles and Mary Lamb.
She's written on the Gender and Writings of Charles and Mary Lamb in 1991, and a book about Welsh in the lives of women in Wales, in Welsh and then in English, and has written Welsh writings in English, and she published Cranogwen, her latest volume, this year. So thank you very much, Professor Jane Aron. Well, thank you very much, Melly, for the invitation to speak to you tonight about Jane Williams and his relationship with the Church in Wales. So I hope you can see that now. So the person who should be here tonight is Gwyneth Tyson Roberts. She was the specialist on Jane Williams's life, and I depend on her research throughout this presentation. She died just a year ago, sadly, but the volumes she produced on our subject today, there are 3 of them. The first, The Language of the Blue Books, and the powerful influence of Empire, which was republished as The Language of the Blue Books, Wales and Colonial Prejudice later. And then, as she worked on that volume, she decided that the most important contribution at the time when the reports were published, the most important contribution in favour of the Welsh was the article of Jane Williams at Ysgafell. So Gwyneth did a PhD on Jane Williams's work, and that dissertation was published by the University of Wales Press. And then, just before she died, she produced Cambrian Tales and Their Selected Writings, a compilation of Jane Williams, with her own introduction. Now, it will be launched officially on the 26th of September at the National Library of Wales. Any of you who are around, please, would we love to see you. But who was Jane Williams of Ysgafell? Well, she was born in 1806 in Chelsea, in London, to a Welsh father, David Williams, and an English mother, a right English mother, and Wyn. That her father was employed as a clerk in the Admiralty, and one of his ancestors came from a farm called Ysgafell in Montgomeryshire, and his forebears were persecuted for being Baptists, but by the time Jane was born, the family were Anglicans, and Jane remained an Anglican all her life. But unfortunately, her mother's inheritance was lost in financial loss when Jane was a teenager. So suddenly she fell from the middle class into the working class, which was quite a terrible fall in the pre-Victorian age. So you were looking for work, and then she became a children's nurse with a family in Radnorshire. And then at 18 years old, she was a nursemaid. She published her first volume, Miscellaneous Poems, which was published with the aid of subscription. And that showed the strength of her character. Not only had she learned to live with this financial fall, but also she challenged the gender conventions of the day. She put her own name to the volume, and that was especially challenging for a housemaid. We don't know much about her after that, but she was working in the 1830s as Lady's Companion to a gentlewoman called Isabella Hughes. And then there was another turning point in her history. When Isabella Hughes died in 1845, she left £100 a year for Jane Williams, which was enough to enable her to live independently at that time. She also met Augusta Hall, Lady Llanover, during that time as well. And she was taken into her culture. Augusta Hall paid for the subsequent volumes, article and the literary remains of Reverend Thomas Price. And the Llanover circle of poets and other artists around Lady Llanover. And in 1849, she published 500 tales about this circle, but she then returned to London, even though she never lived in Wales afterwards. She took holidays in Llanover and then produced the autography of Elizabeth Davis or Betty Cadwallader, as she's known. Today we want to concentrate on her response to the Blue Books, as it's shown in 3 of her publications. The standpoint of Augusta Hall on the Welsh language was made obvious when Augusta Hall won an historic competition on the advantages resulting from the preservation of the Welsh language. Now, this is a quote from the Welsh language version of that essay. Even though Jane Williams had learned Welsh after coming to Wales, she didn't publish in Welsh. So this is Gwynllan Gwent's Augusta Hall's the patron of Jane Williams on the language. It says that the Welsh language is not only one of the oldest, but the most majestic of the languages of the earth. God has helped us through our language to avoid the corruption of the English. And there have been so many moral publications in Welsh that stand against the evil and blasphemous productions in English. Mothers of Wales, speak Welsh to your children. You will be a traitor to your own hearts if that we don't keep the language given to us by God from the early ages. So, but the blue books attack the Welsh language and said it was responsible for all sorts of immorality. And the children of Wales had to learn English to join the civilized world. Jane Williams said that her reports were deliberately unjust toward the Welsh. Homework. So the called her relegation article after the hero in Spencer's Fairy Queen, a fighter against injustice. And Jane Williams' article says that the aim of the three commissioners who had the job of producing the report on Welsh education in 1847 was not to create an impartial report, but to show that every child in Wales needed to learn English urgently and forget their Welsh to save their souls. That Jane Williams said that was their intention from the start, and she does that by analysing the language of the report. So in English now.
Beth oedd yr achos? Helpu Llywodraeth San Steffan i gael gwared o'r iaith Gymraeg. A oedd erbyn hyn gyda thwf y chwyldro diwydiannol yng Nghymru, ond eisiau mwy o...
So they were helping the English government to get rid of the Welsh language. They had more and more workers from Wales, so they had to turn to the language of the masters and the Rebecca riots was blamed on the language because the police and the military tried to suppress that, didn't understand the language. And Jane Williams says,
enormities is traced to one origin, their ignorance of the English language. Oedd Cymru yn barbaraidd oherwydd o'n nhw ddim yn deall digon o Saesneg. Cydweithiodd llawer
the Welsh were barbarians because they didn't understand enough English.
Ond yn ôl Jane Williams, oedd nhw eu rhesymau personol am wneud
many witnesses helped to underline this message. But their personal reasons for this, and the transferring of control of schools to the London government would save time and energy for priests and other leaders in parishes in Wales.
And the clergy administers their care and toil by commending the schools to the proper charge of the executive government, and therefore they endeavour to give the worst possible account of the moral necessities of the people. Ddad yw, mae'r adroddiad yn ffug o'r cychwyn twyll yma. Y comisiynwyr sydd yn cael ei beio yn fwyaf.
He's suggesting that it's fake from the start of the report. So the commissioners are the ones most to blame in article.
Yn fwriadol, gofyn cwestiynau dyrys iawn i'r plant.
They don't just work visiting schools, asking very complicated questions to children.
Say what an angel is. Who can? Yna, beir hwy am y ffordd roedd yn trefnu'r twstiolaethau a dderbyniasant oddi wrth offeiriad lleol a thystion eraill. Gan
And
greu
then
camargraff
they
trwy
blame
orbwysleisio
the
yn eu
way
prif benodau
they
unrhyw dystiolaeth anffurfiol
used
erbyn y Cymru
the
a gwthio
evidence
unrhyw
of
fath profiol
priests,
gyda'r
etc.,
datblygiadau.
and
Fictitiously
emphasizing in
theorising
particular
out of the records
any
would be beautiful picture
negative
which is
comments
on
about the
page
Welsh.
in the sub-gallery of an appendix. Nothing bad is omitted. Rosodd hefyd Bernir rhwy am gamgymeriadau eu harddil llwy hunain. Maent yn brytheirio yn erbyn Saesneg gwael plant Cymru, tra bod eu iaith llwy hunain
And their own style of working went in this way. And complaining about the English of the children, but their English wasn't good either. And in that cartoon, she's shown chastising them for that. But she said there's a reason for their poor English.
He, who being thoroughly possessed of a truth, gives it utterance in lively earnest, is always eloquent, always effective. But he who has already determined to adopt a certain set of notions, and is really endeavouring at once to uphold the belief of his instructors and to establish his own belief in these notions, while he delivers them as absolute certainties to the people, cannot fail to betray, by some doubtful gesture, some verbal hesitation, some equivocative or evasive expression, the natural feebleness and half-conscious imbecility of error. So arddull gwael nhw i'r raddau yn dangos, ond nhw'n gwybod bod nhw'n dweud anwyredd. Mae'n ceisio profi fel arall.
So their bad style really betrayed their untruthfulness. And an example of this is given the evidence of somebody who was in the class when one of the commissioners was asking questions. And it's she quotes from a letter written by Gwinllan to the Times 1948 after he read the after the report. And then Mr. Simons came to Gwinllan school in 1947, and he judged the children's registry about their understanding of miracles.
Ond roedd Gwynllan yn bresennol yn y dosbarth ar y pryd. A dyma'i adroddiad ef am yr hyn a ddigwyddodd.
But Gwynllan was there at the time, and this is a report of what actually happened.
He commenced the lecture upon their ignorance in a strain of severity which I considered not only out of his provision as a commissioner, but rather more harsh than the case required. And I observed that I was not sure that I could answer that question myself. I then made an attempt and said something about violating the laws of nature, but being conscious it was not the proper answer, I asked Mr. Simmons how he would explain it. He was silent for some time, and then, with much hesitation and in an undertone, he assented, yes, and repeated by words, violating the laws of nature, which after all was not the right definition. So that the question was not answered at all, either by the children or by me or by Mr. Simmons himself. Now I ask, is this a case to justify so prominent a charge of ignorance as that which appears in the report? Hynny yw, oedd y Comisiwn yn gwybod yn iawn ei bod yn amhosib rhoi ateb syml I gwestiynau fel beth yw angel.
That is, the commissioners knew that you couldn't answer questions like what is an angel or what is the meaning of a miracle. It just could not be answered effectively. And Simmons' uncertainty himself shows that the questions were really deceitful. They were trick questions. What about all the clerics who gave evidence and who said that all the Welsh were ignorant? And they are judged harshly in article. But Jane Williams draws attention to the fact that it wasn't Welsh clergy who were included in the evidence.
The position is the following. The above remarks on the intemperance of the people and the number of the injurious effects of the public houses apply to the principality also. Mr. Harrison is an Englishman. He was presented to the perpetual curacy of Builth in 26th of September 1844. Consequently, he had resided there about 2 years at the period of his giving evidence. He had no previous acquaintance with Wales. His whole deposition, therefore, is impeachable on the grounds of his personal want of knowledge and intelligence, and all the consequences deduced from it by the commissioners are naught. The Reverend James Denning, curate of St Mary's, Brecknock, exclaims, "I cannot too strongly express
And another example she
the
gives.
necessity of getting rid of the Welsh language. Banish the Welsh language, and Englishmen will come and reside here, and thus a healthy tone would be given to society." Mr. Denning is an Anglo-Irishman and has fully manifested his perfect incapability of knowing and representing the feelings and circumstances of the people. Yet this man's deposition is a high authority, a treasure of citation to Commissioner Simmons. The Beard of Feiriad di Gymraeg yng Nghymru am y brad y mae Jane Williams yn article. Mae tystiolaeth y Cymru Cymraeg, medde hi.
So she blames the non-Welsh speaking priests of Wales. Is that the more favourable evidence of the Welsh speaking clergy is actually put into an appendix, and evidence of her favourable response to the Welsh speaking clergy is going from the fictional work in Ainsworth magazine just recently been republished, and that supports the Welsh speakers. So English visitors come to see Lady Jeffreys, which actually stands for Lady Llanover, and she introduces them to many of their local friends so they can understand more about the Welsh. And they're entertained by Reverend Hugh Evans, who talks about his love for his land and their landscape. And this is a conversation about him after he left.
He is a true Welshman. He is tedious and talks skimble-scamble stuff. Do you not think so? Indeed, indeed, interposed Lady Jeffreys and Lady Llanover, earnestly and somewhat peevishly. I think he is a very good and sensible man. What a horrid provincial accent he has, said Mrs. Brown, says Nazar. How very oddly and ignorantly he pronounces many easy words. Pray, Mrs. Brown, said Mrs. Tudor, Cymraes lleol on. Spare criticism on the Welsh accent. We are all sensitive on that point. For that accent,
this is local Welshwoman, Mrs. Tudor.
Those native of every class whose first words were uttered in their dear mother tongue. His voice, said Lady Edith, Saesnes on my hitipin mwy hynaws na lleill. His voice is finely modulated and rich in various intonations.
Lady Edith is more favourable than the others.
I am sure he is a good man. Why has he not the living of this Welsh place? Because it is mine, replied the English Archdeacon.
So, he should be the proper priest.
Dyma godi, pwnc o bwys mawr yn yr Eglwys yng Nghymru yn ystod y bedwaredd ganrif ar 15, sef nad oedd y ffeiliau Cymraeg eu iaith yn cael
that raises a very important matter in the church in Wales in the 19th century, that Welsh speakers weren't given the best positions in the language. In the church, Lady Leffrys equals Lady Hanover, and says this as soon as the Archdeacon has left.
Our Welsh establishment. Maybe, inquired Mr. Willoughby, Sais ond un fath o swill. Maybe, inquired Mr. Willoughby, consider Mr. Evans as a specimen of the Welsh clergy in general?
Mr. Willoughby was an Englishman.
Yes, answered Arthur Tudur. Of the working clergy, certainly. Of the working clergy, certainly. Manly energy, devoted piety, kindly sympathies, indefatigable industry and contented penury are their ordinary characteristics. Sagacity and learning are common among them, and talents for music and poetry are by no means rare, while the elegant tastes and accomplishments of some individuals would confer honour upon any country or station. Such was the lamented Carnihanaf, the unambitious yet immortal Thomas Price of Cwmdu. Yw'r unig ffigwr go iawn sy'n cael ei enwi yn y gyfrol. Oedd Carnihanaf wedi marw yn 1848 yn buan ar ôl iddo ddanfon llythyr.
That's the only real figure in this volume. And as he died in 1848, shortly after writing that letter to the Times. His representative in fiction is the hero of the Cambrian Tales, which, as quoted, when a party is climbing to the summit of one of the nearby mountains, and that fella, Simon, has a very a horse which is very difficult to treat, and she whips it, and then it takes us away from the rest of the party.
2 or 3 feet short of that precipice where she must have perished, a man suddenly appeared on foot. At the instant of the frantic animal's approach, he darted forward right in front, and with both hands seizing him by the bridle at the risk of his own life, stopped Miss Fitzsimon's course and saved hers. The sudden shock threw her to the earth. Mr. Evans, hynny yw y parch yw Evans, fe wrth gwrs yw'r dyn yma sydd wedi dod I achub hi. Mr. Evans hastened to raise her.
That's Reverend New Evans, who has come to save her.
The Welsh parson soothed the agitated young woman, told her that no doubt he was sent on purpose, directed by a premonition to that desolate place to help her, for after the long journey that day to tend his scattered flock, he had debated with himself whether or not he should come on to visit a sick woman, the wife of a shepherd whose cot was yonder, and he had come on, though he was tired and the hour was late, and he was returning and had met her just in time to save her. Sitting on a rocky crag in that mountain wilderness, with the shade of evening spread around and no one near her but that lately despised stranger, the forlorn Miss Fitzsimon learnt one of her first and most effective lessons in the directing care of a beneficent providence, and in the worth of human sympathy, the precious reality of human brotherhood. Nid yr un fenyw yw Bella Fitzsimon wedi hynny. Mae'n newid ei hagwedd tuag at y Cymru yn llwyr ac yn dechrau...
Well, Bella Fitzsimon is a changed person towards. she changes her attitude to the Welsh
Commentators ar
people
ei hyd, mynnu
completely
parch
and
tuag at
start
gyffeiriad
to
Cymraeg. Dim
respect
ond
them and her
ysgogion
fellow
Cymraeg sydd fel sicr i'r eglwys
humans generally.
hytrach na Chymru Cymraeg sy'n distrwyo'r eglwys. Fel y
Uh,
dywedodd Lady Jeffreys, ac yn
It's
hefyd be byddai
the
tangnawd yn sicr ac yn
non-Welsh bishops who are giving jobs to non-Welsh speakers, which is drawing the church in Wales, and Canniano could have agreed with that. So we can say that the Welsh speaking priests are heroes, not traitors for Jane Williams. It's the non-Welsh speaking ones who are the traitors. Thank you very much, Jade. That was very, very interesting. And also frightening as well, kind of attacks who are on the Welsh. Before we have a break, anybody with questions following that talk? If so, put them in the chat or raise your hand to ask a question.
Trio gweld os oes unrhyw wedi codi llaw. Dwi ddim yn gweld unrhyw.
I'm just seeing, anybody have a raise their hands? I can't see anybody. Anybody put anything in the chat?
Mae gen i gwestiwn I chi. Ydych chi'n meddwl, pan bych chi'n meddwl bod
No.
Wel, dwi'n siarad...
So I have a question to you.
Brofiad personol, dwi ddim yn
Do you think, why do you think I'm speaking from my personal experience? I don't know anything really about this history. It's not discussed in the schools at all. But I'm aware that many priests come into the church from outside Wales now. There is that those people need to learn about this period. Well, I certainly feel that. And I hope that the new curriculum will bring that into the schools. It's very interesting that Jane Williams is clever in her argument. It would be quite easy to gain the interest of school children in the whole history of the reports. I would it's interesting to see how they would answer the those questions about what is an angel. And I got a question here. Enid, would you like to expand on your question about Ieuan Brydydd?
Pan oedd e'n ymosod ar esgobion Eingl.
Ysgafell, it was the same argument that Ieuan Brydydd here attacked the English-speaking bishops, and that was protest that we going for a century more. The same argument was and the fight for the Welsh language by individuals. And we didn't have a Welsh church, just 4 dioceses, all led by English speakers, and didn't need to talk to people. And the church was an Erastian church under the feet of the politicians who just want the votes of the bishops in the House of Lords to do what the government wants to do. But certainly Jane Williams knew that very well. In the Literary Remains of Thomas Price, she quotes a lot on Thomas Price's views on the English bishops who just gave jobs to other Englishmen. And
sylweddol i ni, os nad ni'n wneud
she said that it was destroying the church in Wales, and the non-conformists will take over if that isn't changed. And that's what happened, especially among the Welsh speakers. And, you know, you throw your hands in the air thinking about the stupidity of the whole situation, and so much hypocrisy was there. Another question here from
Cwestiwn da.
Rhedian. Who had the subscriptions to James Williams's first volume of poetry? Good question.
Robert Wyn. Yn sicr, oedd meistres, oedd hi'n gweithio fel morwyn.
I haven't reached that, searched that, unfortunately. She worked as a maid for a woman called Priscilla, and she was one of the main subscribers. For the others, many will probably be in that area of Rednashire. But from what I remember from Gwyneth's comments, there weren't any famous people there. She just worked in the locality to collect money as an 18-year-old for the publication. So, although she'd ended up as a housemaid, that's not all she was. I have one question myself before we have a break. I don't know, it's a silly question, but you spoke about it at 18 years old being a children's nurse and in the working class. How did she come to know Lady Llanover if she was in the working class? Well, through the influence of this Isabella Hughes. He had quite a good name and was a friend, I think she was a friend of Lady Llanover, and then she introduced a companion, lady's companion to the Lady Llanover, and Lady Llanover saw the book of poetry and was impressed, but she never worked for Lady Llanover. She wasn't an employee. She was independent before she published the books that Lady Llanover paid for publication. She had just enough money to be independent. So that Lady Llanover just saw her potential then. One question before we have a break. Enid asking what's the importance of Ysgafell? Come Gerald, it says, yeah. What's the importance as a historian? I looked at the history of Wales, and I would say that almost the whole story in history of Wales and the history of Wales before the fall of Llywelyn, or the fall of Llywelyn, or the time of Wyn James. Actually, just focuses on Wales being free or attempting to be free, rather than Wales under the English. So that says a lot about her. And it was seen as a volume before its time at that time in English, but influenced by Carnianog's work on the history of Wales as well. So, following a very interesting presentation by Professor Jane Aaron, we now move on to our next speaker, Professor Wyn James. So, before retiring, the Professor Wyn James was professor in the Welsh Department of University of Cardiff, and of the connection between the university and America, and he's interested in women's literature, in publishing in Welsh, and the anti-slavery movement and Patagonia, and he's involved in the hymnology movement of Wales. So, and he's been a visiting professor at Harvard University. So, welcome, Wyn James. Thank you very much, Mally, for that kind welcome. So, in the first half of the 19th century, what Artie Junk is called the Personniad Llenga, the literary priests, and they helped to encourage the growth of the Eisteddfod and the cultural life of Wales in general, and to improve the Welsh character of the established church. And we've already met some of them. Ifal Cerrig, Walter McNamee, John Blackwell, the poet Allen, and Glan Gerionnydd, and one of the most important of them was Thomas Price, that we've heard about in the last session. Even though many of these priests lived in Wales, some of them lived in England. Well, Ian Bangeraner spent some time in England. But an unexpected development in the mid-19th century that we find many of these patriotic priests living near each other in Yorkshire, who call themselves the Association of Welsh Clergy of the West Riding of County of York. Now, the history of that society begins in 1821. Many of these patriotic Welsh clerics came together to celebrate St David's Day in the West Riding. And in 1821, that happened in Bramley Rectory in the parish of Leeds. One of the priests, Robert Humphreys, from Llanbeblegyg in Carnarvonshire originally, who had just started as a curate in that area of Leeds. And they met in his home, and that society, throughout its life, they met every St David's Day, and they moved from one place to another, moving around like the National Eisteddfod. And one person who had and encouraged this was William Morgan from Brecon, between Talgath and Bilth, and he lived in Bradford. And then the festival was held in 1822 in Bradford from William Morgan. He is the most well-known of these Welsh priests by now, because of his very close connection to the Brontes. He was a relative there through the marriage, and he baptised Charlotte Emily down Bronte and married Patrick Bronte and Maria Branwell, their parents. So he's well known in the English literary scene because of that. But in terms of the Welsh priests in the West Riding, even more important during the life of this side of 1820 to 1850 was somebody called Lewis Jones, and he came from North Ceredigion, from Llanfihangel Cenarglyn or Llandre, and he went to Almonbury, somewhat to the south of Huddersfield, in 1821 when these meetings starts, and he said that as a vicar then, from 1822 until he died in 1866, and Almonbury was a very big parish. It 30,000 acres there, and because of the Industrial Revolution and the cotton and woolen mills that were established, the population grew incredibly during that period. The population of the parish was 24,000 by the time Lewis Jones went to Almonbury, and then it had increased to 37,000 by 1841. So very great the growth in the population. Now he builds more churches in his parish, establishing schools as well. They're very evangelical style, and during his time in that parish, he built, he funded at least 15 churches and 20 schools, and he was called the church building parson. So that's what the local English people called him. And he was a very strong Welsh patriot. And we can say that he was the anchor of this association of Welsh clergy in the Welsh Riding from the beginning until the end of this society around the middle of the 1850s. And he was responsible directly that there were so many Welsh speakers in West Riding, because he could appoint clerics in the churches that he'd established. He has the right to appoint people to livings there, and he was keen to appoint Welsh clergy where he could, and many were evangelicals, because that's where he stood. And that was true about many of the members of this West Riding Society generally. Not only in Louis Jones's parish, they were Welsh patriots and evangelical in their theology. Many of them came from Ceredigion in North Pembrokeshire, there were many Methodist clergy had remained in the church when the Methodists started to ordain their own minister in 1811. Many in that area stayed in the Anglican Church. But we can look at, we can see the Welsh clergy of York as Methodists between the Anglican Church, even though Daniel Rowland and William Francis-Celyn were thrown out of their livings by the Anglican Church. They remained Anglicans, and their heirs really were these priests in the West Riding who are evangelical and patriotic Welsh clergy in the church. And they were heirs to people like Carniana, Candy Velgeri, the early literary priest as well. And we're a good example of this in David Jenkins. Now, David Jenkins was a priest in St. near Leeds from 1812 onwards until he died in 1854. So he spent his life really as a priest in the Leeds area, and he was present in the first a meeting to celebrate St David's in 1821, and then a faithful member of the society until he died. And he was from Llwyn Piad, the parish of Llanbadan Odwyn, near Llangeitho. That's where he came from. And he was the father, and his father was one of the people converted by Daniel Rhion Llangeitho, so direct connection with the Methodist of Llangeitho there. And his brother, Evan Jenkins, is an important character. He became a priest as well, and he was for many years a priest in Brussels and chaplain to the King Leopold. And David Jenkins knew the Bronte family as well, and had worked closely with Patrick Bontre before moving to Pudsey. And Evan Jenkins, his brother, comes across the Bronte family on their visits to Brussels in the 1840s, and began friends with them, and they stayed with him in Brussels. And he appears as a character in one of Bronte's novels in 1853. So there's these two brothers from Llangeitho had close contact with that literary family. So reporting on David Jenkins's death at the time of the St David's Day after he died, here's one of the last to see David Jenkins alive. Talks about his meeting with David Jenkins just before David's death, and these reports by the clerics are mostly in English, apart from their quotes of Welsh poets. I think even though most spoke Welsh, I think some were not fluent in Welsh. So just repeating in Welsh, in English now.
The atonement made is inconceivable, and yw tu hwnt I am gyffred. I depend upon his righteousness, Christ's righteousness. His robe alone can cover me. His atonement is ample to satisfy my sins. Hynny yw datganiad cwbl efengyl ddylewch chi'n.
Very evangelical statement there, but in this discussion with this conversation with his friend in the West Riding, they then talk about Wales, and he says, I don't know in Welsh or English, but it's quoted in English. He said he would like to see Wales once more before dying, and he says,
and there to be buried.
And in saying that, he was, his friend says that his emotions overcame him as he talked about Wales there. Well, if Lewis Jones was the anchor of the society, if he was the anchor for 40 years, we sense that the energy of the society was Dewi James, so Dewi o Ddyfed. He was in the West Riding for periods, and then he was in Liverpool, and then he worked in Wales as well. That's true. Many of these people, some of these people in the West Riding, they were there for many years. Others were there for a period and coming and going. Like in the case of Dewi o Ddyfed. But it's worth noting that although they lived in West Riding, that many of them kept in close contact with Wales. Many of them, as we'll see later, very supportive of the Eisteddfod and came at Wales to support the Eisteddfod and were connected with the Lady Llanover and the Welsh of Abergavenny. Even though they were in the West Riding, they also were part of a network of clerics and other cultural figures in Wales during that period, going into the second half of the 19th century in terms of the Eisteddfodic figures. Thomas James, Dewi's younger brother, and his rhadig name, Llallaw, but I'm not sure what that means. Or if you go into the you got some ideas from the University of Wales Dictionary. Trallog, I think was it. Dewi o Ddyfed had been a priest under Lewis Jones, and Trallog, his brother, had been given the a living on Nethelon in 1846. And he was one of the West Riding priests, and he was a great Eisteddfodwr for the Eisteddfod. And he was one of the, there was another cleric who was really just of his Cowningly. He was for years the secretary of the society and their official bard, and he was there for so many years. And as his bardic name suggests, he was from English originally, and he was very much involved in the Eisteddfod movements, like the Llangollen, they said in 1858, which prepared the way for the establishing of the National Eisteddfod, which was established from 1861 onwards. And that's the first Eisteddfod where the gorsedd wore their white, green and blue costumes under the influence of the Oxford movement. Abithel, one of the leaders of that movement, was involved very much in the Llangollen Eisteddfod. So the influence of the Anglican Church is there on the gorsedd ceremonies and costumes. So Llallawg and Carlingly were instituted into the gorsedd by Dewi o Ddyfed in the 1849 Eisteddfod in Aberfrel. And Dewi o Ddyfed had been instituted at 16 years old by Iolo Morgannwg himself in 1819 in Carmarthen, and he had great interest in the history of the gorsedd and Druidism in general. in 1836 when he was curate in Almondsbury. He published a volume called The Patriarchal Religion of Britain, a complete manual of ancient British Druidism. Now, Dewi o Ddyfed, he was born in the north of Pembrokeshire, in Vineyard, Dewi, the Pembrokeshire side of the River Dewi, between Cardigan and Newcastle Emlyn, where Ewell Kerry was brought up as well. And having been in curacies for a while in Wales, in 1821, he went to work as a curate with Lewis Jones in Almondsbury, and then he moved in 1886 to Kirkdale in Liverpool, and he was there for 17 years, I think, until 1853. And then he became the headmaster of Llandovery College, and then went back for 2 years to Yorkshire and to Panteg in Pontypool in 1856, and he stayed there until he died in 1871. Dewi o Ddyfed didn't publish llawer. His son says that's one of the reasons that he wasn't so well remembered later. But in his day, he was considered a great orator and somebody that we would call an influencer. He was a very enthusiastic person, and who would actually say what was on his mind, quite similar to Thomas Brai's Caniannog. But his history has been forgotten greatly by today. Like most of these priests in Yorkshire, not very few people ever discussed them recently. So Roger Brown and Arthur Dale Jones are exceptions, but hardly anybody else discussing them at all. There's just a paragraph here and there about them. But from 1821 until the middle of the 1830s, this regular meeting in the West Riding was a kind of annual dinner club to celebrate Sir David's Day, not much more than that. But from 1835 onwards, it became more of a press group. One senses that Dewi o Ddyfed, Wyn James, was behind that, this change of gear. And in that year, 1835, near the end of Dewi o Ddyfed's time in the West Riding before going to Liverpool, this group decides to send a petition to Robert Peel, the Prime Minister, asking for the appointment of Welsh-speaking bishops for the Welsh diocese from now on. And Dewi o Ddyfed puts this petition together on behalf of these clerics in West Riding. And he argues very strongly that English people wouldn't accept people who didn't speak English in their parishes. But that's been true for Wales since the reign of Queen Anne in the 18th century, and that has led to the growth of nonconformity and the weakening of the Anglican Church. And the The Society of Clerics in the West Riding would send petitions about the Welshness of the Church and connected matters to the authorities, to the Prime Minister, to the House of Commons, to the House of Lords, to the Archbishop of Canterbury, and members of the royal family from the middle of the 1830s until the middle of the 1850s, a very long period, and they do this constantly during that time. So every March, the authorities would get a similar petition from them. And Dewi of Ddyfed goes to Kirkdale in Liverpool 1836, but keeps in close contact with the West Riding group and works together with them and goes back and forth on St David's Day to their meetings. And once he comes to Liverpool, he campaigns against combining the dioceses of Bangor and St Asaph, and use the money saved to establish a new diocese in Manchester, and he strongly campaigns about that and speaks at many meetings. And then in 1840, he put together a petition to demand the establishment of chairs of Welsh in Cambridge and Oxford. And then he writes to Conor Powell, who is to become Bishop of St David's. And Dewi of Ddyfed sent an open letter to Conor Powell telling him not to accept the post because he doesn't speak Welsh. And he argues that the Pentecost story in the New Testament says that people should hear the gospel in the their own language. He says, you
will contribute to the perpetuation of one of the grossest and most deadly abuses that ever a country endured. Dweud mawr ag roi gan Dewi of Ddyfed down ddweud
then Dewi of Ddyfed had that was good at expressing himself directly. But instead of refusing to be Bishop Conor Powell, Powell actually learns Welsh. And in 1863, Dewi of Ddyfed accepts into the concert. Dewi of Ddyfed came back to the West Riding in 1854 for a couple of years. At the time when there was a new development in the history of the society, was publishing substantial reports of their annual meetings, and these are published 1852, 1856. 1856 was when Dewi of Ddyfed moved to Pontypool in Monmouthshire. And not much is said of the Society of the Lads. Maybe there's a connection. And all these reports have a similar pattern. They have an introduction by the Secretary Canningly, where he expresses the hiraeth of these clergy in the West Riding for Wales. And he says, we people of South Wales and feel perhaps more care for the welfare of Wales than some of the people who live in Wales. That's absence like the hearts go under, as it were. And then there are reports by Canningly of the activities of the year and the petitions, etc. And he usually includes a poem leading into the report. And that's all these annual reports have reports of petitions to the Prime Minister, etc. And one of the members would table the petition and speak on behalf of it, and there would be a seconder, and their speech would be recorded, and including the response of the audience, like laughter or applause in square brackets. And then they have dinner together and with toasts, and they discuss a number of matters in these sessions. For example, they are in favour, for example, of the right to use Welsh in the courts of law, for example. But there are three main themes to these petitions over a 20-year period. The first is the need to appoint people to parishes in Wales who speak Welsh, especially bishops who spoke Welsh, who would then appoint the parish priests. And in these reports, you have sometimes sadly humorous reports when some of these English-speaking priests try to speak Welsh. One of them, in Ysgafell Marcus, Henffych well Brenin Rewan, and came out as an old cow king of Ireland. And another example, which another example which came out as nonsense when it was spoken in somebody who didn't understand Welsh. So they emphasised the responsibility of the church to appoint Welsh speakers. And then the other theme was the sad state of the church buildings and schools, because people were appointed by the bishops who were friends or relatives to them, and kept the income of the parish to themselves instead of investing the income in the parishes. Llallong, the brother of Dewi, Ddyfed, says that Anglo-Welsh bishop
Welsh clergy treated as a set of cart horses to do the work, whilst aliens received their revenues and did nothing.
And they're especially critical of the institutes around cathedrals, which were necessary, so we call it formal religion, and the featherbeds of the privileged and indolent. So they're saying very directly what the situation was in reports which were printed and published quite widely. And they include many facts in these reports and name particular people, and they are criticised for naming individuals, but they said they were representing facts. They list in one report many churches in Anglesey whose buildings have fallen into disrepair because of lack of investment in the parish, and they name one of the bishops of Llandaf appointing his son as registrar of the diocese when he was 5 years old, and he was registrar of the diocese for 60 years and receiving £40,000 in fees, and he was absent from the diocese himself. So the two important subjects, the language of the bishops and the sad state of the church buildings. The third subject, which is improving education generally and increasing the number of schools teaching in Welsh. And they are also concerned for a University of Wales. And what they argue is that this university should be a federal one, and using the church colleges in Lampeter and Llandovery and Brecon, and also the grammar schools around the country, using them to become a federal university. So people could go to colleges near their homes rather than having to go away and pay for their keep, for board. And they say that the university should be founded from broad. That is, they should be universities who would be open to members of the Anglican Church, but also non-conformists, which was a different situation in Oxford and Cambridge at the time. And they are committed Anglicans, but they understand why people have left the church, and they claim they blame the church hierarchy for alienating people, including Daniel Rowland and Francis Kelly, even though they remained in the church, they were alienated from it. So they'll blame the Methodists and the non-conformists. They blame the church. Can I just note before I finish that in these reports, it's obvious that these clerics were clearly espoused the Protestant concept of the church. And I quote from Bishop Richard Davis in the introduction to the 1567 New Testament, that the early Church of Wales had been purely Welsh and Protestant, but had been forced by the Normans to be part of an English and Roman Catholic Church, and that led to the centuries of darkness until the Tudors came to the throne, who regained the crown for the Welsh, and they I think in particular of the Elizabethan age as a great age in Welsh Protestantism, including translation of the Bible. And then we have a golden age of Welsh bishops, etc., until the reign of Queen Anne and then the 18th century. It was the English bishops who were appointed, and their hope now is that a new golden age may come, the age of Victoria, as in Elizabeth VIII, and they talk of Victoria as somebody whose veins, through whose veins the blood of the Welsh princes flowed. So these people have been very much forgotten, were for many decades arguing for Wales and their culture, and especially for recovering the Welsh character of the church, and could speak plainly and could do that. We've got to it outside of Wales, outside of the Welsh diocese. So where the word says somewhere that he doesn't fear what a bishop or archbishop says if a justice on his side, but he could say that recently, because he was out of the control authority of the Welsh bishops. It's difficult to decide how much direct influence this had. They were very committed, very enthusiastic, but you can imagine most of their petitions were ignored, and there had been a strong response against them from many people that they were more critical. But we can see them as preparing the way for what happened a little later. By 1870, we have a Welsh language bishop for first time for centuries, and then an university after 1872. But by drawing attention to these problems with the church, the church in Wales, they were also feeding the work of Henry Richard, etc., against the alien church, as they called it. Thank you very much, Wyn. So it's very interesting. So I just ask if you can join us after 8:30, so the chat and talk session. We can talk then. So if you want to ask anything quickly now, do that. I'll just give a chance, an opportunity. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll pass on to Wyn James for the thanks. Thank you very much. It was an interesting talk. I'd like to thank Jane and Wyn for a very interesting talks. It's inspiring for me, who is working in the church in Wales, to hear about these people who actually kept standing up for the Welsh speakers in the church in Wales. I hadn't heard about Jane Williams much before, so I'm looking forward to reading those books about her. But to think she was so young and used literature to make a point. That's very inspiring. And a great fan of the Brontes. I'd not heard about this context between the Brontes and these clergy in Yorkshire. I enjoyed that very much as well. But in terms of the people here who are members of the church in Wales, there's lots of parallels between this period, what's happening now, and helps us to consider what to do in our time. Thank you, Jane and Wyn, about the interesting section. So, thank you very inspiring. And thanks to Mally for sharing as well. And I should say, we'll talk about the book, Governing Gwinllan, this volume, about the talks we've had up to now. Wyn has been very much part of this project, and Gofal has edited it as well. So find a copy. It's not very expensive. It's £10–15.